We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callTW.
So you think that you can tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder, what will it take for you to start opening your eyes? I wonder.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is September 26, 2021. If you're watching us live, and we hope you are, and if you're not, we're sorry you couldn't be with us here live, but you know, you can have the option of rewinding everything else. I'm Matt Dillahunty, joined this week, Jim Barrows, and I don't know if you guys heard that, but Facebook just tried to call me, so that's nice.
How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. How are you?
It's been such a beautiful weekend weather-wise that we finally got down out of the 90s. Humidity was in the low 30s. Just gorgeous weekend. So I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome. I'm glad the weather is improving down there. There's a number of things to get to, not the least of which is a reminder that there is going to be a delay of somewhere between 0 and probably 3 seconds in some of these calls. Jim and I are aware of it. The people behind the scenes are aware of it. There's nothing else we can really do at this point, although we're looking into other options. And we're going to try to be as forgiving and kind as we can, because genuinely we'd like to have good conversations. So if you are a theist, if you're a God believer of some stripe, or if you believe in something supernatural or wooish, you can call the number at the bottom of the screen to get to us, and we will do our best to have a conversation where we discuss whether or not we agree, and you can explain what you believe and why. On that note, we are already taking a call live from India. Here is Ram. How are you, Ram?
I'm doing great. I'm doing wonderful.
A note here said that you can't prove God, but you can feel him, and wanted to talk about that. So welcome. Please explain.
Okay, thank you. So the last time I called, I was 2 years ago. So I really took your guys' message very seriously, and I became an atheist, and I felt a sense of strength and power within me, the thing that I didn't before. So I was, didn't believe in God for a long time. And, things, life passed, and, I got some issues. I got a lot of issues. I became very sad and hopeless during the time period, and very depressed and all those things. 6 months ago, I started to believe in God again, and I've been thinking and just wanted to, discuss what I had thoughts in mind, and so I wanted to discuss a few points with you.
Absolutely. And first of all, I'm really sorry to hear that you found yourself sad and hopeless. I hope that instead of just turning to a God belief, although I'm happy for anything that seems to help people, maybe did you talk to a counselor? Did you reach out to a therapist? Because depression is something that many people deal with.
Yeah, I did talk to a lot of people. Just that
I didn't ask.
Conversation will come up.
Ram, I didn't ask if you talked to a lot of people. I was asking if you talked to an expert, like a mental health expert.
Yes, I did talk to a couple of counselors. I talked to psychiatrists and all those things. So I'll talk about it, and maybe you can give me some points wherein things can change. I can be very glad of that. So
well, I'm not a therapist. I just wanted to make sure that we recommended that. But I'm interested in when you say six months. When you say 6 months ago, I just want to make sure you got help and didn't just go reaching for it. You said 6 months ago you started believing in God again. What convinced you?
Yeah.
I mean, because I couldn't just I don't know, Jim could either one of us. I couldn't just say, hey, I believe in God now. Something would have to convince me. And so I'm wondering.
Yeah.
What
I mean, it'd be really difficult for me to do that. Yeah.
I met someone and they changed my mind, and it was that was it. I met someone and they changed my mind.
Okay, how
I
did
can
how
talk
did they
to you
change their
a bit
mind?
more about it.
How did they
Okay.
change your mind?
So basically, we were talking about science, and they basically said that science cannot explain everything, because science looks at things in a very empirical manner and systematic manner. Okay, it looks at systems and the studies of it, and it fails to highlight the emergent properties from that model. So whatever model we do predict, so there always seems to some properties come emerging out of it. Things which we didn't predict in the initial system, they just come crashing on us, and we have to make a new model to explain things. Okay.
Well,
So this has been the problem of science since ever. So this
so
is
Ram,
inherent.
yeah. So first of all, I have a friend, Aaron Ra, who's been on the show before, and he likes to say that science doesn't know everything, but religion doesn't know anything. And so when someone tells you that science can't explain everything, it's true that science has not explained everything yet. I don't know how they reached the conclusion that science can't explain everything or ever, but the fact that there may be something that science doesn't explain doesn't mean that it's real, and doesn't mean that religions have an explanation. So what was it that convinced you that a religious explanation was correct?
First of all,
Would you just let me finish the question? I know you could hear me. There wasn't a gap in it. I didn't pause at all. I just wanted to get to the question.
I'm sorry. I should have.
Please continue.
Okay. So firstly, I'm not arguing for religion. I'm arguing for God. Okay. And secondly, I think there is an inherent, and they also think that there's an inherent flaw, and I can in science to explain certain stuff, and I can explain with an example. Okay. So this example has come up before also. So there is many scientific theories predict multiple universes and multiple levels of existence. Yes, they do.
Some hypotheses do. Yes, there are some hypotheses. That's different than it's different than a theory.
Okay, so some hypothesis, some hypotheses, they say that this could happen. This is like inherent in the system, and so we can't prove it until we actually travel between them, or somehow find a way to bridge the gap between these worlds, and we can't really prove that these things exist, right? And but a lot of these theories, a lot of them, they come to the point of that there are multiple universes, that there are multiple realities and existences, and it just seems so. Everybody, a lot of people, they do believe in this thing, and they work every day towards proving this thing. In science, scientists do that.
Yes, lots. There are some people, I don't know how many to qualify lots. Yes, there are people who accept that there are multiple universes. Yes. So what's your point?
The point is that we can't really prove that there are multiple universes.
Yeah, there's no proof. That's why it's a hypothesis, and that's why I corrected you when you used the word theory, because theory is reserved for things that, if they're proven untrue, would fundamentally change the way we view something in science. It's the highest accolade for truth that science provides. So it's all hypothetical. Yes, it is hypothetical. Some people believe it, some people don't. So what?
Yeah, Ram, the point is that
Mm-hmm.
there are scientists who are working to try to explain things, and one of them will come up with some of them will come up with a hypothesis, like maybe there are multiple universes, and several other people will say that's a really interesting hypothesis. How can we go about testing it? And then they will work tirelessly. It's not that they believe it's necessarily true; it's that they believe there is benefit to working towards demonstrating that it's true. And the time to believe that there's a multiverse is after that hypothesis is tested and confirmed. That's the way science works. You know what scientists aren't doing? Positing God or supernatural things, because those things aren't testable. So you're comparing apples and oranges, because science, yes, can create a model and say, here's what we think could be happening. Let's try and prove it. and they will work to prove it. And then when they can, then it's time to believe it. But science doesn't say, here's what we think's actually happening. We think there's a supernatural being that created the universe. We just can't prove it. That's not what science does. And so if your point is that science doesn't have an explanation for something, therefore I'm reasonably justified in believing in a God, you are in fact 100% completely, undeniably wrong. Because in order to be justified in believing in a God, you would need to have evidence for that God. Now, you could be perfectly reasonable in saying, I think the God hypothesis is a reasonable hypothesis and we should be working on it. The problem is my now deceased friend Vic Stinger wrote this book, God, the Failed Hypothesis, which goes through why God is not a valid, reasonable hypothesis within science, why it hasn't been demonstrated, why it can't be demonstrated. And so you're calling now to say that you were an atheist for a while, you got depressed, somebody convinced you that because science doesn't know everything, maybe you should turn to God. Well, that is a fallacy, Ram. That's all we're trying to say.
Well, I think that logic is not the only tool in the world, and I mean there are other tools than logic to lead yourself.
Ram,
And,
Ram,
mhm.
I didn't say anything at all about logic being the only tool in the world. But if you're using a tool and it violates the principles of logic, what reason could you possibly have to think that it's correct? Can you name anything else that has been demonstrated to be the truth that violates logic?
Anything else? I mean, isn't one thing enough?
Okay, what's the one thing? Name one thing that's been demonstrated to be true that violates logic.
Oh, mad fashion. Well, there are a lot of logical paradoxes that exist, and we don't know where.
No, Ram, I apologize, but I asked for something that is demonstrably true that violates logic, something that nobody has ever been able to demonstrate in history. There are things that seem irrational. There are things that violate our understanding of the universe, and there are things that are paradoxes. But I asked for something that was true because you believe in a God now. And when people point out to you that you're engaged in logical fallacies, you say, well, there's other ways of knowing than logic. Prove it. Show that you have a way of demonstrating that a God exists that is more reliable than so that we should set aside the logical fallacies in your argument. That's what we're saying.
Well, you're saying that prove logic with logic? Is that what you're trying to say that only?
No, and you're not listening, Ram. So I'm going to move on to somebody else because if we're going to go to all this trouble to point out logical fallacies and then have you say, well, logic isn't the only way of knowing, and then when we ask you to demonstrate some more reliable way of knowing, you're just asking, well, you're saying prove logic with logic? No, you're no longer listening, Ram. You're not thinking about what we're saying at all.
Okay, I'll try it again.
Thank you.
Maybe you have to believe in certain things, and then you have to do it that way.
Well, maybe, are you saying you have to believe in God first? Why would you believe in something first? That is the very definition of how you go about deceiving yourself, by believe something before you have evidence, and then you seek things out that confirm it. That is remembering the hits and avoiding the misses. Now you're engaged in yet another logical fallacy. Do you not care about whether or not your beliefs are true, Ram?
I care, and sometimes, a lot of times in logic also, there are axioms that we think things. For example, we take them for truth, and then we build systems around it. And
Ram, you can do this shit all day long. You are engaged in actively making excuses for why you believe bullshit. You're essentially saying, I can't prove it now, but maybe someday I can. And what I'm saying is the time to believe it is after you can actually demonstrate it. Before then, you are engaged in an act of self-deception and logical fallacies. If you actually care, Ram, whether your beliefs are true, then you should care whether or not you can demonstrate them.
Maybe I can't demonstrate them, but I can definitely tell you what are the positives and why you should do it.
Hang on. I want to make sure I'm clear on this. You're saying you can't demonstrate that it's true, but you can demonstrate the positives and the benefits of believing it. Well, I didn't ask about the positives and benefits of believing it. I asked whether or not it's true. There are plenty of things that one could show positive benefits for believing when the belief isn't true. It is demonstrably not true that any given kid can in fact grow up to be anything they want to be. Yet we tell them that because when they believe that, it encourages them to strive towards better things. But it's a lie. It is absolutely a lie that you can grow up to be whatever you want to be. So pointing out a benefit of something is completely irrelevant. I don't care if there's a benefit to it. I want to know if it's true, because with those benefits also comes baggage, because now you believe something that's not true, and that can be harmful.
Yeah. And I would ask the question, are any of those benefits directly tied to the belief in God, or can they be achieved without the belief in God? So, because I don't know of any benefit of believing in God that I don't have as an atheist, not believing in God.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you stay happy? And, like, how do you stay content in the fact that, purpose of life and things like bad things happening to, good people all the time, and cancer happening to children?
Ram?
How do you how do you get around this?
That's real simple, Ram. It's real simple. Things happen, right? And we label them good or bad. And sometimes by labeling it bad, then we do in fact make it worse for ourselves. But the fact that things happen doesn't have any effect on whether or not I'm happy over a long period of time. It may affect me in the short period, especially if it's somebody that I care about, where the bad things are happening, or the things that we label that are bad are happening. But honestly, I don't see why I should let that get me down. And I don't see how all of a sudden having a God to blame for bad things happening to good people helps me stay happy. How does that work? Because if there's a God and he's supposed to be all good, and he's allowing bad things to happen to good people, how is he a good God? How does that work?
Yeah, and before you get to answering Jim's question, I want to point out that when you ask, how do you stay happy? How do you deal with all these things? Realizing that the universe doesn't exist for me, isn't here to make me happy. Your entire question here is an implied fallacious argument, because it goes like this. Premise 1, I'm not happy. Premise 2, I'm supposed to be happy. That's the flawed premise. Maybe you're not supposed to be happy. Maybe you're supposed to be legitimately sad, maybe about certain things. Maybe being sad about something is how you begin to learn to take action to prevent those things from happening in the future. If you are just sad about your existence and you decide, hey, I believe in a God, and that makes me happy because this isn't the end of existence and everything else, what you've done is decided to deceive yourself into ignoring the problems, and you will never, ever solve them, and you will never work alongside other people to solve them. Life is painful. Life is hard. Life isn't fair. Life doesn't have any special goal for you. Bad things happen to good people. Bad people get away with things. It is up to us to realize that that is the truth, so that we work to solve that problem. If we bury our heads in the sand and pretend that everything happens according to God's plan, and God understands the shit we don't understand, so we don't have to do anything, that leads to the extinction of humanity. It's a blissful extinction where you get to sit around and go, God, I'm the special creature of a loving God. And that way, when I die, it's not all over. And all this bad stuff happening can just be fucking ignored. It's absolutely disgusting. I know why people do it. I know why it appeals, because it feels good. But I give a shit about the truth and making the world a better place. And I'm not the slightest bit interested in what your unsupported, unrealistic belief in a God. If that makes you happy, cool. I'm sad that you prioritize your happiness over the truth.
Well, I do agree that, doing it to the extent that you're saying it is very, very bad, that you don't look at the pains of life and you just give it up to God and don't fix things. I don't think we should do that at all. But the other way, the atheistic way, is also, it's too extreme. It's too extreme because, like, I felt a sense of very, very, very hopelessness. Things can't be fixed. I mean, the systems in itself are extremely broken and
What do you mean things can't be fixed? If you're not going to work on them to fix them, then they're not going to get fixed. If the only thing you do is pray, they're still not going to get fixed because you're not doing anything. So if you want to fix things that are wrong in your community, you need to roll up your sleeves and do the fucking work. You can't
I don't know what you
pray.
mean by saying atheism is too extreme. All I'm saying is that I don't believe there's a God. Nobody should believe there's a God until there's a good reason to do so, until there's sufficient evidence for it. How the fuck can that ever be too extreme?
well, it can get extreme in that for example, that the fate itself, like if we have it's a theistic belief, then we can feel that okay, it has been done for a reason. Things which are like beyond our control, and I mean there are certain things that are beyond our control. We can work as hard as we like, and we can't fix them.
Yes, that's very, very true. How does believing in a God fix that?
How is it remotely extreme to recognize the true facts of reality? You know what's extreme? Opting for a delusion because you're dissatisfied with the facts of reality. That's extreme.
Yeah, and saying that everything happens for a reason, I mean, it's true, and that reason is usually physics, but saying that things happen because some God wants them to happen doesn't make that God all good, doesn't make anything better. And it's not acknowledging the reality of your situation. It's not saying that this is something I can't change, so I need to stop worrying about it. I need to stop throwing energy at this and go work on things that I can change. Or I need to sit down, if it's important enough, and figure out a way to change it, figure out what I need to do, and then go do those things. Sometimes people say there are things you can't change because, they don't want to go run for Congress, or they don't want to run for city council, or they don't want to run for office or do political stuff. And sometimes that's what it takes to change things. If you want to change how the poor are treated, you're going to have to get out and knock on doors and talk to people and change people's minds. And that's a lot of effort. And sometimes that's what they say too. So I don't understand this whole thing of there are things we can't change and therefore God makes it better.
Yeah.
No, that's not the attitude that makes it better. What makes it better is throwing your energy at things you can change or figuring out a way to change it.
I'm genuinely sad, Ram, that you found yourself depressed to the point where you gave up on reality and opted for fantasy. But I'm never, ever, ever going to say that that's the right thing to do because I care about whether or not something's true. I don't see what's so extreme about being rational.
I don't know. It's less comforting.
Yes, it is less comforting, but that's because you have a fantasy version of what you want reality to be. You are literally, well, all right, not literally because you're using different words. You are essentially saying reality isn't what I want it to be, so I'm going to believe something different. You are taking the Adam Savage, I reject your reality and substitute my own thing, which is comical, and doing it for real. Why?
Isn't the real purpose of life to have a satisfying, happy life?
No, Ram. When you say isn't the real purpose of life, you've already made a mistake. There is no real purpose of life. Your life can have whatever purpose you attribute to it. There is no externally imposed purpose to life. There's no purpose to life. There is no guarantee or external motivation for you to be happy, for you to be healthy, for you to be knowledgeable, for you to be anything. That's the beauty of it, is that we get to decide what we're going to be. Go ahead.
It's the internal motivation, right? Nobody wants pain. Nobody wants to have endless amounts of pain.
Correct, but you're going to have pain whether you decide to believe in a fictional God or not. So why do it?
You'll have less pain.
No, you won't have less pain. What you're doing is you'll have less reality. And if you want to engage in the I give up on reality, so I'm going to believe there's a God so that I have less pain, what's causing you pain, Ram, is the false expectations that people, including you, have put in your head. You expect life to be fair. You expect life to be happy. You expect life to be this. And when your expectations aren't met, that is saddening. So make your expectations commensurate or comparable to the facts of reality. If I have my expectations of reality, whereas that I'm going to live to be 300, have $1 billion, be the sexiest man on the planet, never have a moment's misery, I'm going to be sad all of my life because none of that's going to be true. But that doesn't mean that I should go believing in a God who has a plan to make me less miserable.
Okay.
I got to
that's
move on to
a lot
other
of food
callers.
for thought.
Think about it some more. I'm genuinely sorry that
I'll
you.
think about it.
Yeah, I'm
No, no, I
genuinely
understand.
sorry that you were sad enough that you just went for a God, but you clearly don't value reason and you don't value evidence. You went with how you feel, and that's the pathway to massive misunderstanding. Just trust in your gut.
I'll think about it. I'll think
Okay.
about it some more.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very welcome. We have a number of announcements to get out of the way. That's the first caller. We did quite a bit there, and it's because Ram called a couple of years ago. So I'm just, it bugs me, and I'm a little sad when I see not everybody can understand all this stuff, and we can do what we can to explain it. But watching the path of Jim comes up with a question that is designed to expose something, a flaw in thinking, and I come up with a question that's designed to expose a flaw in thinking, and they just skate right by it and go, well, science doesn't know everything. Well, isn't the purpose of life supposed to be about being happy? Who told you that?
Yeah, and happiness is very often a choice. I mean, the Stoics had a philosophy, or one of the Stoic principles is amor fati, love your fate. Love the moment you're in, because honestly, what's being angry and upset going to do? It's not going to do you any good.
Yep.
At all. It shuts the mind down. So does fear, and those are not good places to be. So keep that open mind and keep moving forward and make the choice to be happy every time you wake up or think about it. And there are times you're going to be sad and upset and you're all these other things, but you try and get through that as quickly as possible to get back to a normal, steady state of being happy.
Yeah. When they ask what makes me happy, lots of things make me happy. Food makes me happy. Sex makes me happy. TV shows make me happy. Marvel movies make me happy. Good stories make me happy. Watching other people smile makes me happy. Watching people learn makes me happy. Does that mean I'm happy all the time? Nope, not one bit. I got health issues that don't make me happy. But if I just believe that it's all part of God's plan, then I don't go get treatment for those health issues.
Right. And then you're really not happy, because nobody can be happy while they're sick, they're physically or mentally ill and having to deal with all those issues. Chronically ill people tend to have less happy lives. And, there's a whole bunch of conversations we can have on that topic as to how to help that out. But
let's nail some announcements real quick. First of all, for those of you watching us live on YouTube right now, greatly appreciated. You can, in fact, donate. There's a link down below your chat thing there. You can donate whatever you wish, whatever you're able to. I understand it's difficult times. All of your money goes directly to the Atheist Community of Austin. YouTube and Google don't take any portion of it, and it goes to help promote this program and all of the other ACA programs as well. You can also get yourself some Atheist Community of Austin merchandise. The URL for that has changed from several months ago. tiny.cc/merchaca is where you want to go there. You can also become a member on YouTube. If you become a member, not only do you get some, cool little icons you can put next to your name, but you can also get out of slow mode, which is something that we don't just put in there to annoy people, but if you're actually a member of the channel, that's one of the benefits of that. And then there's the Patreon support, patreon.com/the Atheist Experience. If you are not interested in that, but you do want to interact with people, there's a number of different ways you do it. We have a couple of unofficial things that we like to support, and that is the Atheist Experience fan group on Facebook. It's AXPFG there under groups. And then there's the Atheist Experience private fan group, which is AXPPFG there as well. And there's the unofficial ACA Discord, where you can go and not only have conversations with people, but there's a lot of folks in there who are willing to offer advice and help and some arguments as well. But we'll get more down that road just a little bit later. I want to talk to Jordan in Virginia. Thanks so much for waiting. You're on the line with Matt and Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Not too bad.
Doing good.
Yes, I was calling in today. I've been watching different content, debates over atheists and theists, and I've come to enjoy the content. It's just nice to kind of like pick your brain and just try to understand things a little bit better. But for the most part, it's given me more and more doubts about my faith. And I've followed a little bit of your story, Matt, and it's one I feel like I kind of relate to. I am also have a Christian background. I just recently got out the military, and I've been having my doubts, and yet it's more or less just giving me frustration with the Bible. But I don't want to let go of my faith. My experience as a Christian in church has been more or less very good. And
so was mine, by the way.
Considered as,
And so is mine.
oh, okay. Well, so
I never had a bad experience.
Yep.
I wasn't. I didn't have run-ins with church people. But what eventually became more important to me, whether or not it was true, than whether or not I'd had a bad experience. But also, I can point to lots of people who did have bad experiences. But there are good and decent people within different religions and outside of it. There are plenty of churches that generally do good things, but that has nothing to do with whether or not the doctrine at the foundation of it is true. It just, one thing doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the other.
Sure, absolutely. I get what you're saying. Well, so what I was curious about is that as I'm getting older, one of the most important things for me, I'd love to be, a dad, father, and from my experience and the examples I've had in my life, it would seem to me that it would be a good idea to raise children and to marry someone and have my foundation, as Christianity in the Bible. And I'm curious from your transition and you've become an atheist.
I'm wondering why you feel that, when one of the prime examples that I'll go to immediately is, we know from scientific study and psychologists that physically beating children is a bad thing. And yet the Bible completely advocates for it. Spare the rod, spoil the child. If Christianity involves raising kids with corporal punishment, and we know from science that that's bad, clearly that's a problem. How do you resolve that?
Well, I guess as far as beating children, like I've said, I've had my concerns with the Bible, and honestly, I wouldn't really agree with all of it anyway. I mean, I've kind of been more comfortable with using my brain, but even still, I have yet to want to make that transition to atheist. But I don't know. I don't know anything about the science. All I could say in terms of disciplining children physically, it worked on me, and I would.
Wait, whoa! What do you mean?
No, it didn't. You now think it's okay to beat kids. You didn't come out okay. You think it's okay to beat kids. That's not okay. You didn't come out okay.
And setting aside what you do or don't know about the science, what is it that you think is essential about Christianity that someone can't raise kids and be a good parent if they're not a Christian? Because that's what you're implying.
So that's exactly what I'm calling about, because I'm curious about kind of how you transitioned, and because I know that, or at least from videos I've heard, that you're married. I don't know if you have any kids, but I'm not sure if it's the right way. I feel that it's the right way, and more or less the reason why I would say it's right is just because that's my experience, and that's it's just kind of, I'm biased, and it
doesn't sound like you've thought about this at all. I want to let Jim ask a question, but if you're basically saying it looks like you haven't thought about it at all.
Yeah, because basically when you raise a kid as a Christian, you're fundamentally telling them that they're broken, and the only way they can get and they can never get unbroken right? And that's very, very different than saying, yes, sometimes you will screw up, but that doesn't mean you are a screw up, right? And yet Christianity says you're a screw up from the beginning. You're fundamentally broken from ground zero, from day zero. And that is not a good way to bring up kids. And if you've got a daughter, bringing her up with the Eve story, not a good thing, right? Because Eve is the downfall of humanity and women are bad. That's kind of the message that little girls get. And that's not good either. So in what way do you think it's good to bring them up?
I mean, well, so like I said, it's just more or less my experience. I will say this. I had a friend recently that we had a conversation about religion and God, and he's been married for a few years, and he's got 2 kids, and he seems like he's got a really good marriage, and he's, I would say, a good dad, but that's never been a concern for them. They don't talk about religion at all. So that's, one of the things that I've had that's made me kind of consider, because I'm pretty much putting myself up to be swayed, but it's hard to say. It's not like I have evidence or anything. I can just more or less say that these people in my life who are Christians raised their family as Christians, and it worked out for them. And from my experience.
Okay, but by that argument, you should also take a look at every secularist who raised their kids without religion, and it worked out for them. So now, at a minimum, you're in a position where they're on equal footing. But here's the thing. I can point out a dozen things in the Bible that you're going to not agree with. You're probably okay with spanking, even though you shouldn't be, based on the science. But it's the punishment in there is if a kid mocks his father and mother, the punishment is death. There's nothing about this that is necessary. But if you say what you did a minute ago, which is that you're not going to believe everything in the Bible, then I have a very important question for you. What criteria do you use to determine which parts of the Bible you can ignore without pissing off God?
Well, as far as so over the last, I'd say 2 years, and listening to atheist content and arguments, I just feel like there's not enough there to really prove God. But yet, I like the idea of God, and I would
do you accept as true the proposition that there is a God? Do you accept that proposition as true, that a God exists?
I would say yes, but I'm not sure if it would be the God of the Bible. But yet,
so then why on earth? No. Here's the thing: you think you're probably convinced there's a God, but you're not necessarily sure if it's the God of the Bible, and yet you're sitting here saying that you want to raise your kids as Christian, despite the fact that you don't seem to know that much about it, and you're fine with, Christian churches evidently teaching your kids that they were born wrong, they were born bad, they were born into sin, that there's something wrong with being gay, lesbian, transgender, that you should beat them when they misbehave, that you should kill them if they violate certain rules. And then you say, well, no, hang on, I don't necessarily believe that. So now you're going to pick and choose. If you're going to pick and choose from the Bible, why not pick and choose from everything in life and take the things that are good, that are supported by evidence, that are supported by science, and get rid of the things that are demonstrably bad? What if there's no reason to think that you were born wrong? Why would you do that? If there's no reason to think there's a hell, why would you let anyone tell your kids that they will burn in hell forever if they don't give in to Jesus?
And if you've been listening to atheist content and if you've been listening to the XP, then there are callers who have been atheists for 20 years and still have nightmares about burning in hell. And we've had
teaching kids about hell is child abuse.
Yeah.
Teaching kids the bulk of Christian doctrine is child abuse. Following what the Bible says with how you're supposed to treat your kids is child abuse, and you should be arrested for it.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. I do recall one video, I saw a clip of it, and it was you speaking with someone else, and it mentioned about a little girl. I think her father had passed away, her mother, and she wanted to go to heaven and somehow ended up killing herself. And, those are the kinds of things that I'm afraid of because, like I said, I haven't had a bad experience with Christianity, but other people have. So I am concerned that if I...
Yeah, and the bad experience is less relevant than is it true, right? Do you want to bring your kids up in a way that they become more susceptible to the likes of a Joel Osteen or one of the hate preachers out there, or some cult? Or do you want to bring them up to think for themselves? You very, very difficult to raise kids to think for themselves and in a Christian household.
Yeah. The better thing to do is to set aside all this concern about religion, or absolutely set aside the notion that you should pick one religion that you're not even convinced is true to raise your children. You want to know how to raise children? You teach your kids how to think, not what to think. You encourage discovery. You encourage exploration. You encourage empathy. That's how you instill good moral values, not by beating them, not by offering them rewards and punishment, but by teaching them about that their actions have consequences, that they impact the people around them, that we have to share space with people, and how would they feel if somebody did this to them? That's how you teach people. That's how you teach kids empathy and morality. You should focus on all of that. And if, as they grow up, they decide that they want to participate in a religion, then if you've taught them how to think and encouraged them to embrace reason and evidence, what have you got to worry about? If there's a God, if the only way to raise kids is through some religion, we already know that's false, because we know, I can point you to parents, and you've met parents who are completely secular, who are raising their kids secularly, and who have wonderful families and wonderful kids. As long as that's possible, it would seem to me that it would be a devastating mistake for you to not follow that path. Because if there is a God and you opt to teach your kids secular values and teach them how to think and teach them reason and empathy, and it turns out there's a God, then either that God is the type of God who's willing to accept and reward reason, empathy, or punish reason and empathy. And if it's a God that can punish reason and empathy, fuck him. That's a monster.
I got you. So I guess from what you said, in your opinion, it would be more detrimental to try and I guess indoctrinate a child into religion. And,
of course, because what if you indoctrinate them in the wrong religion? What if you raise them Jewish and it turns out Christianity is true? What if you raise them as Christian and it turns out the Hindus are right or the Muslims are right? You've indoctrinated your kid into the wrong religion, and you're in a position where you are freely acknowledge you don't know which one is right. How could anyone say, you know what, I think I'm going to indoctrinate my kid into this religion that I'm not convinced is true, and then, now that they're convinced because mommy and daddy are supposed to be trustworthy and, they led them to that. What are you even thinking? How could you possibly pick a God for your kid when you don't even have, it's absurd and it's obscene.
Well, I've got a problem with the word indoctrinate, which is to teach a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. Why in the world would you want your kids or yourself to believe anything uncritically? Doesn't that just sound like a recipe for being hoodwinked at every turn and being easily led astray?
Well, I wonder, could you do both? Could you teach them about the Bible, teach them of Jesus, but not necessarily encourage them to still ask the hard questions, ask the questions.
Are you going to teach them? Are you going to teach them about the Bible? Are you going to teach them about the Bible and the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita and every holy book on the planet? Are you going to do that?
Well,
No, you're not. So let's not pretend they are. I'm in favor of comparative religions courses where you learn the basics of it. But you don't know enough about any of this, and you're definitely not going to be teaching them every world religion.
Right. Much better.
You haven't even bothered to teach yourself the world religions. You haven't even bothered to teach yourself the one that you're most closely tied to. I gotta go. I gotta move on, Jordan, because we got announcements to do. I just think about it and call us back. Just, rather than trying to continue the discussion, think about that, listen to it again, and feel free to call us back with more questions. But I got to move on. Now, somebody out there is going to email and say, "Oh, you were just so hard on that person." No, I wasn't.
Yeah,
No, I wasn't.
Really weren't.
We're talking about how people are going to raise children, how they're going to raise the next generation. I don't think you can possibly be, in words and language, too hard on parents. The thing is, Jordan, I think, wants to be the best parent that he can be.
Yeah.
I think almost everybody does. And they don't know what they're doing. And this is why many parents just default opt for religions.
Right.
It's not a solution at all. And it can go horribly wrong, especially if there is a God and you picked the wrong one. But
Right.
if there's not a God, you're still wasted.
Yeah, just telling somebody they're fundamentally flawed and there's nothing they can do about it is not good for anybody's psyche. And very, very different from, sometimes you will screw up. I mean, those are two very, very different things. You can teach kids how to, correct their actions and to recognize when they've screwed up and to fix what they did and go through all that. But when you're fundamentally broken in some way, which is the concept of original sin, there's no fixing that, right? Except the cure that is being offered once they've convinced you you're sick.
Yep.
So none of that's good.
But if you want to get answers and you want to have discussions like that, there's a number of other resources out there, not the least of which is, in addition to the Facebook groups we previously mentioned, there's an atheist versus theist debates group, and you can come there either as a theist or as an atheist and participate in discussions and debates there. For those of you who are watching the Atheist Experience right now, you're probably familiar that earlier in the day, there was this other show called Talk Heathen. And I have to say, it was awesome. J, Mike, and Katie were on there. You should go watch it. There were lots of good discussions. And to the caller who called in to Talk Heathen to suggest that the Bible doesn't support the notion of an afterlife by pointing to the passage in Ecclesiastes 9, I think it was. You should also go read Ecclesiastes 4:2, where it says the dead are happier than the living. And then you should also go read what the scholars say, because Ecclesiastes was written by a non-believer. And you don't just get to pick and choose. They were correct. That person's personal interpretation is their personal interpretation. It doesn't even match up. Oh, I found the secret knowledge in the Bible. But in between Talk Heathen and Atheist Experience, the Atheist Community of Austin's flagship program, The Nonprofits, airs in the 3:00 hour. And if you weren't familiar with these shows and you haven't been listening to them, then you might not also know about Secular Sexuality on Thursdays and Truth Wanted on Fridays. And you can find all of these as audio-only podcasts at tiny.cc/AEN podcast. AEN stands for Atheist Experience Network. You can see it right there in the logo. That is your one-stop shop for all of the ACA productions. And it's a great place to go to get information on all those shows and be able to listen to those shows. And all of those shows exist and are done not because of me, not because of Jim, although we participate in them a little bit, but by these folks, the ACA crew. Look at that. They're screening your calls now. They're working on audio. They're working on video. They're the ones that make these shows happen. It's incredibly good. And because there are all these shows, and sometimes it's a little too much for everybody to keep up with all the shows every week, we've got the solution for you. Here's what you might have missed.
And he goes on to say things like they're having drag queens come in and read to children.
Man, I wish that drag queens were getting invited to read to kids in schools.
There was one guy that said a female Bigfoot drug him up from the creek and had intercourse with him. And of course, my question is, how was it?
Please, this isn't Thursday.
Dave Chappelle did a bit talking about how after 9/11, he turned on the news and there was a reporter that was like, we're going to go right now to talk to Ja Rule about his thoughts on this tragedy. And Chappelle's like, no one gives a what Ja Rule thinks at a time like this.
This tin of beans is the almighty deity, and we need to worship this tin of beans because it will bring us prosperity and it will make us all fertile.
I do not care what your religion is. I do not care if you believe in a God. I do not care if you like green eggs and ham.
The subtitles were awesome.
I just want to say that the first time I watched that, when they sent the clip to me, I looked at that and I was like, what is that? Green eggs and why are there two pigs and why? Oh, green eggs and fucking ham. There we go. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, we have
Thank you to everybody
very
behind the
talented
scenes,
people.
for knocking that out. And we got a lot of calls. I want to try and get to them. One of these days, I'm going to warn you guys in advance. Maybe, I don't know if Halloween's the best time to do it. At some point, I want to do an Atheist Experience where it is as rapid fire calls as possible. Now, this is a thought in my head. It may not be the best thing to do. There may be people behind the scenes who don't agree with it. I'm not trying to say, hey, let's not have any long conversations. I love the long conversation. I love being able to get to the meat of stuff. But man, maybe one day it would be good to just do like you got 1 minute to state your case and we got 1 minute to move on, to respond and move.
Yeah.
But here we go. Kevin in Arizona thinks I'm wrong about something about the God question. So let's sort it out.
It's not that you're wrong. I don't think that you're wrong. I think that you're asking the wrong question.
I'm not asking a question. Okay. There's a proposition, and the proposition is some God exists. And you're either convinced that that proposition is true, or you are not convinced that proposition is true. And all I'm asking is, for the people who are convinced that the proposition is true, what is your reasoning?
I can give you my reason, but I want to clarify what I mean. So basically, you say, do you believe in God, yes or no? And then you say, why do you believe in God? Justify why you believe in God. I think you kind of have to approach it from a different angle.
No, you don't, but go ahead.
And so, I think the problem with approaching it that way is it becomes a binary yes or no question.
It is a binary question. It is absolutely a binary question. You are either convinced that a God exists, or you are not convinced that a God exists. What other option is there between I am convinced a God exists and I am not convinced a God exists? That one is a direct logical negation of the other. No. Your reason you're not sure is because you don't understand. One is a direct logical negation of the other. There is no. For every everything we could discuss, it is either A or not A. There are no other options. Everything is either A or not A. Do you understand that?
I agree with that 100%. And this is where
then you cannot possibly disagree, because what I described is logically, philosophically, semantically identical. Because either you are convinced a God exists, that's A, or you are not convinced a God exists. That's not A. Those are the only two options.
There are a lot of people that say it's impossible for me to make a decisive yes or no answer, and those people are called agnostics.
Yeah, no. Sorry, you're not listening, Kevin, and you're not thinking. I didn't say that that there needs to be a yes or no question on does God exist, because yes means you're convinced that God exists, and no means that you're convinced God doesn't exist. That's not at all what I said. I said you are either convinced that a God exists, or you are not convinced that a God exists. If you are not convinced that a God exists, that does not mean that you are convinced that God does not exist. In the same way that if you are not convinced that the defendant is guilty, that does not mean you are convinced of their innocence.
I believe God exists, and let me state my case.
No, Kevin. I just went through a detailed explanation of how this is in fact binary. Shut the fuck up. I just went through a detailed explanation of how this is in fact binary. And when we get to the spot where you, under normal circumstances, would say, oh, I now understand how this is binary, you instead go on to say, I believe in God and want to say why. Did you fail how to have a basic conversation and acknowledge points?
Stated was correct. So let me take it a step back, because I could see that we're having an argument, we're not having a discussion. I really respect what you do, even though I disagree with you. I'm a theist, and I've been a theist for most of my life.
Kevin, did you just sit there and talk through that whole explanation? I'm waiting for you to acknowledge that, in fact, what I was saying was a binary issue was in fact binary.
Okay. It is binary, and I think I I didn't present what I'm trying to say because this is difficult to do talking in front of thousands of people.
You're not talking in front of
Let me-
thousands
let
of
me
people.
get to
You're
the-
talking to me and Jim.
Yep.
Okay, so let's have a conversation. Let's not curse each other out. That's unnecessary.
How about you stop telling me what fucking language I can fucking use on my fucking show,
If you
and
wanna
you
get
learn
to
how to
the
have a
point, it's not to
conversation
make you-
where you acknowledge a fucking point and stop trying to dodge. I'm going to give you one more chance to continue the discussion. Please have the discussion and stop being a dishonest interlocutor by avoiding the
I'm
fact
not
that I
being
mentioned.
dishonest.
You absolutely are, and now you're focused on what language I use. So let's reset right now. I'm pushing a reset button. Hi, Kevin. Thank you for calling the Atheist Experience. I'm Matt. This is Jim.
Hey, Matt, how you doing?
You thought I was wrong about something, but since then we've now cleared that up. So what would you like to talk about now?
Okay. I believe that there are two types of truth. There is personal subjective truth, and there is external objective truth. And they are completely different things. And that
How
is
do you prove
possible
subjective truth? How do you prove subjective truth
You
is
cannot.
true?
There is no way to prove subjective truth.
Which
Why
means
do
you
I
also
care?
can't prove that it exists, which means you being convinced that there's subjective truth and external truth is already a fallacy.
Let me ask you a question. Let's look at the phenomena of rainbows, okay? And visible light. So after a storm, basically you could see a rainbow because the raindrops are refracting visible light to create a rainbow. But is a rainbow objective scientific truth, or is it a subjective experience? Which is it?
Objective scientific truth.
No, because if you're blind, you can't see a rainbow.
Doesn't mean the
so
rainbow
no.
doesn't
No,
exist.
Rock's-
Blind person.
Does not
No,
mean
no,
a
Kevin,
rainbow doesn't exist.
Kevin, stop. First of all, we rebutted your point about there being a difference between personal subjective truths and external truths. And instead of acknowledging that, even after I gave you a fucking lecture about acknowledging that, you immediately went on to rainbows. Now, rainbows are the word that we use to describe this refraction of light. But then your response was, if you're blind, you can't see a rainbow. Well, guess what? If you're blind, you can't see a rock and you can't see Kevin. Does that mean that rocks and Kevin don't exist either? If you can't argue
That's a
without...
terrible argument.
Yes, it is a terrible argument. That's what I'm pointing out, Kevin. You made a terrible argument.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Do you know the expression, beauty is in the eye of the beholder?
Yes, that's
We're not
because
talking about beauty.
assessments of
What does that
beauty.
mean?
That's because
What does
never mind,
beauty-
Kevin.
is
You are
beauty
done.
objective
There are
truth
other
or-
callers waiting. I am hanging up on you because you don't know how to do this, and you just made a shit argument. When we pointed it out, you agreed that it was a shit argument. You just didn't agree it was yours. You said blind people can't see rainbows, and therefore that makes them subjective. That's not true because blind people can't see rocks or Kevin, which makes rocks or Kevin subjective truths. So goodbye, sir.
Yeah. Oh, and rainbows aren't only seen after storms. I've seen several rainbows. One was one cloud that kind of thinned out at the top of it, and there's a rainbow in between the two horns. It kind of did something like this, and in between these two horns, there's a rainbow. And then that was a couple of days ago. And then before that, there was a cloud-to-cloud rainbow with nothing else in the sky. And then one was just a rainbow floating up there because, well, when you get 80% humidity, you get enough water droplets in the air to make rainbows appear without it having to be a storm. So that's also not true.
Meanwhile, the observable phenomenon that we describe as rainbows in a sky sense, you don't have to have water or rain at all. You can see the visible spectrum spread out using prism and other things.
Right.
You see them all the time. But the fact that there are people who can't see it doesn't mean that it's not, that it is necessarily a subjective truth.
Right.
There's lots of people who can't see anything, and that doesn't make everything that they can't see subjectively true.
Right. And I think some people get confused on the definitions of subjective and objective. And subjective is simply that something that exists in a mind. Objective is something that exists outside of a mind. So when theists want to say, Christians in particular want to say that morals are objective truth, no, they're not. They're not objective because they come from God. If God exists, they still come from a mind. That makes morals still subjective. And you just can't get around that fact because it's mind, not a human mind. It is a mind. So that's what makes rainbows objective.
Well, this will be fun.
Okay.
Paris in California, you're on the air.
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
I don't know. It sounds like you're someone who's going to try to argue for flat Earth without being a flat earther, but I'll let you do it.
Well, I'm definitely not a flat earther. So I'm, oh man, didn't think I'd be this nervous. So I'm just curious if I could, I'm just going to read this to you. And if you like, I want to hear your perspective and opinion about this. Because I've heard you argue with other people who were flat earthers and did believe, but I didn't think they necessarily had any good points. And I'm not trying to prove that the earth is flat. I just don't think that that necessarily the reasons that you like whenever you ask people to prove that Jesus exists, I don't think that whenever you try to prove to them that the earth isn't flat, that you're necessarily giving them any better reasons than they're giving you for their beliefs.
Well, that's bullshit because no. We don't even have to go any further. You're suggesting that people's reasons for believing the earth isn't flat are no better than believing that Jesus is God. Well, there's absolutely no evidence that Jesus is God. And there's mountains of evidence that the earth is not flat, not the least of which is the shadow of the earth on the moon.
Right. And then you've also got the Greeks proved it with basic. Go ahead.
I'm not talking about God's existence. I'm talking about Jesus' existence. I don't believe in God. And I'm not really sure whether Jesus existed or not. But so
wait, are you suggesting now, stop, Paris? Are you suggesting that you're only saying people's reasons for believing the earth isn't flat are no better than for the historicity of Jesus?
Believing that the reasons, the historicity. I haven't really studied too much about the historicity of Jesus.
Well, what are you saying about Jesus?
You're getting me very confused.
All right, so I'm gonna read this, and then you just tear it down if you want. That's really what I just want to do, and just try to make it quick. I really don't want to drag out your time, and I'm not trying to be anybody who's like trying to trap anybody in anything.
Okay, get to it. This is already a waste of time.
Okay. All right, so there's millions of people who believe in God, correct? That doesn't mean that, because I've heard you ask people that if they thought that the world or people were in on some giant conspiracy. So I said, there's millions of people who believe in God, but that doesn't mean that they're all in on some conspiracy to hide the truth. They've just been convinced. So why can't that be the same case with people believing the earth is spherical?
This is the stupidest thing I've heard today.
Yeah,
and when I just pointed, when I just pointed out about whether or not Jesus is God, you said that we weren't going to do anything at all with related to God, and then you wanted to read me something. And what did you read? What are the first words out of your fucking mouth? Millions of people who believe in God. Well, the fact is, we have good reasons to believe the earth is flat. We have no good reasons to believe there is a God. We have no good reasons to believe that Jesus is a God. And I already gave you the first one, which is the shadow of the moon on the earth. You can go fucking Google and learn the science that demonstrates that the earth is in fact an oblate spheroid. There is nowhere for you to Google and find the science that a God exists, that Jesus is God, or anything at all, even in the ballpark of this. This was a complete waste of my time.
Yeah. And when the Greeks did prove that the earth was round, or really they proved it was round rather than an oblate spheroid, they did it with simple geometry. So you've got that. There's also the fact that we know there are satellites in orbit that could not be in orbit, would be completely different way to get them up there into orbit if the Earth was flat. We know it because everything we do in terms of navigation, whether you're using a sextant or GPS, doesn't matter. Everything we do with navigation, whether aeronautical or nautical, all in order for it to work, the planet has to be an oblate spheroid. There's just no other way around it. Not only does it have to be an oblate spheroid, sometimes you have to know what your baseline is because the curvature of the Earth is not the same all the way around. It's not a perfect oblate spheroid. And so you kind of have to know where your baselines are, especially if you're doing land navigation and some other things. There is nothing about our existence. There's nothing about the way we know how gravity works that suggests that the Earth can be anything but some sort of sphere. So where is this same litany of stuff off the top of my head proving the earth is round that you have for a God?
He's gone. And a minute ago, in the heat of things, I probably misspoke and said Earth is flat instead of
You did say that, but I was going to let it go by.
Yeah,
and technically,
I corrected it afterwards, so I'll correct it again. But
yeah, and technically, the Earth is a geoid because it's not even a perfect oblate. Anyway, oblate spheroid's good enough.
In any case, you can quickly Google and find a gazillion bits of scientific, no, maybe not a gazillion, quite a few bits of scientific evidence that demonstrate that the Earth is in fact not flat and that it is something spheroidal, however you want to technically define it. Not the shadow of the Earth or the way physics works, the way we understand about the formation of planets and the accretion disks from suns, and how bizarre it would be to have every other body in the solar system round and then this one be flat, and then you have to throw out gravity and the navigation stuff you were talking about. If you look on a globe and you draw a line flying from, let's say, the bottom of South America to the bottom of Africa, that's a certain distance, and we can calculate how long that would take in a plane. If you turn that spheroid into the disk, all of a sudden that strange straight line distance is an order of magnitude further away. You couldn't navigate. It's beyond silly.
Yeah. And, navigation takes into account things like how high you're off of if you're doing it by the sextant, how high off the sea you are and things like that, what your height is. And there's some really complex calculations that well, they're not really complex once you know what they are, but there's a series of mathematics you do to get to the answer of where you are. And all those assume that the Earth is round because it has to. And when the Greeks did it just by geometry and having, I believe, somebody walk from point A to point B, I don't remember what the 2 points were, and figuring it out from there. I mean, that's the simplest proof there is.
So setting aside, and my apologies to all the calls that are waiting, we have, it's either Jesus or Jesus, I'm not sure which one, in California, calling with proof for the existence of God. So welcome.
Hey, how's it going? How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
I'm a little exhausted of things that are obviously time wasting, so I'm hoping that you genuinely have proof of the existence of God.
So this is the topic that I want to talk about, discussing from the Bible directly, like with the actual accounts of evidence that they have found according to biblical scriptures. Like let's say, for example, have you guys read Exodus, where it normally talks about how Pharaoh's chariots are found at the bottom of the Red Sea?
No, yeah, and that's actually not the case. That is not the case. And the Bible being at best historical fiction, how does that prove there's a God?
Well, the thing is, for example, everything about it just makes sense. Like, according to making sense, okay? It makes sense. Even
it makes sense to call bats birds. Does that make sense to call bats birds? Does it make sense to say that you can get striped goats by having them have sex in front of a fence? That makes sense.
I'm sorry. Repeat that question.
Does it make sense to say that you can get striped goats by having goats have sex in front of a fence?
I'm not understanding the question.
Yeah, we know you're not, because while you called in to say you had evidence for the existence of God and you wanted to prove it from the Bible, you don't even know what the Bible has to say. You don't know the things the Bible says that are in conflict with basic scientific facts, because instead of actually studying this and learning it, like I have, for example, you've picked out verses that somebody else has fed you to say, oh, Pharaoh's chariots were washed away when the waters caved in, and so we should expect to see chariot wheels at the bottom of the sea. And then when we go look, they're there. Except the truth is, that's not what we find when we're there. And even if you did find it when you were there, that doesn't prove that a God exists. It proves that there's a wheel at the bottom of a lake.
Right. And when you have absolutely no archaeological evidence that the Israelites were in Egypt and the numbers suggested by the Bible, which would be close to 1 million by any calculation. So we could say plus or minus 30% of 1 million and still be in the ballpark. We don't have any of that archaeological evidence. We don't have any of the archaeological evidence on either the Israeli side or Israelite side or the Egyptian side with the book of Exodus. It's just, just nothing but false stuff that's being told. It just didn't happen, and that's just a fact. So it's not. None of that stuff works for me. Sorry.
So what?
Okay.
Setting aside that, because I want to make sure that we address you correctly. I don't know if it's Jesus or Jesus. That was the first question. But then, what is the actual proof or the evidence that you have for the existence of a God?
Well, see, the thing is, like, you know what I mean? People, just because somebody says that somebody fed other, like, everybody, like, you know, these, like, you know, these stories, somebody just wrote them and they're just fiction, doesn't make them necessarily fiction. Somebody can say that they're fiction, but that doesn't prove necessarily that they're fiction.
So now I've muted you because I specifically asked a question about how to pronounce your name, which you haven't answered. And then I also asked you for your evidence for the existence of God. And your response was to say that just because somebody says a story is fiction doesn't mean it's fiction. You are absolutely correct. And just because somebody says a story is true doesn't mean it's true. You have to actually demonstrate it with evidence. And the fact that you think that you have a story with some evidence to support it does not mean that the story is true in the broader sense. So I'd love it if you could actually answer my question and then present whatever evidence you have.
Now watch this. So my name is Jesus, okay, or Jesus. They're both like, you know, one is whether Jesus is Jesus in Spanish. That's how you pronounce it.
I'm aware of
pretty much.
Habla español un poco or un poquito. I was asking so that I could respectfully refer to you. I don't need a lesson on the origin. I know. Why is this so difficult? Now I know it's Jesus. Get to your evidence, please.
Okay, so man, like, you know, so the thing is this. People actually have said, like, you know, I spoke to Jewish people who actually said that their ancestors had actually spoke that there was a man named Jesus who actually walked the earth. Now, according to us, you know, we believe that Jesus, as a Christian, I believe that Jesus is God. And for somebody to actually say that there was an actual account of...
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't count. I don't care what you believe. I want to know what you can demonstrate to be true.
Jesus, I was a Christian from the time I was 5 until I was around 30 and was studying to be a minister. I'm asking you what your evidence is. I don't give a shit about personal testimony. I don't care what you or millions of other people believe, because the truth is not impacted in any way by the number of people who believe something, how strongly they believe it, or how long they've believed it. What is your evidence for God?
So this is the thing, okay? So I want to have a respectful conversation, you know, but I keep getting cut off, and I'm like, okay, enough of
Then you're going to really hate this.
Saw that coming.
I would really love to have a respectful discussion as well, but I'm running a show on a limited time frame. There's 17 minutes of this show left. There's thousands of people watching, and there are other people on hold. And so if I ask you a question multiple times and all I get is preamble and about how you want to have a respectful discussion, then we're not having the discussion. And then it also prompts me, after the call is over, after I've hung up on you, to make a message like this, which also takes valuable time out of the show. Here's the thing. Bring your A game. Ask God what you should say when you call in, and get to the fucking point. It's really easy. Let's try again. Thea in North Carolina, welcome. You're on the show with Matt and Jim. How are you?
I'm good. How y'all doing?
Doing okay.
Exhausted. So I'm just going to kind of sit here and let you tell us what it is you wanted to tell us.
Well, I had a discussion with a friend of mine, and I actually got hung up on a couple of days ago. And some kind of way we started talking about the end times and what the Bible says. And I always, let me just backtrack. I had a fascination with Revelations when I was a child. I got real fascinated about it, to the point that I just thought everything, something happened that went on, I thought the world was about to end. So I was talking about this article I saw, that it was a school shooting that happened somewhere in North Carolina. I probably think it's north of me or east of me, where I read some of the comments where this one lady had said something about, we are in the end times. And I'm like, why is always when something happens, it's the end times, where this has been happening for years? And matter of fact, it's things that's been happening over the, all over the world worse than what's been happening here. But when it, as a country, when it happens to us, it's the end times. But we don't never say that when it happens to somewhere that's not really impacted by us. So my question is, because I always try to wrap my mind around this, is why as a nation, why do just religion, why do we have this notion that when things don't happen, when bad things happen, that it's always the end of the world, literally? I hope I'm making sense, but
yeah. It's because Christians need the end of the world to happen so that they are guaranteed to go to heaven. They need the end of days to occur. And there are some who think they need to work towards that, which is not a good thing. But I mean, because they read Revelations, and that it predicts this end time, and they have to be ready. So it's always the end time, so they're always ready. You can go with any of those answers or come up with your own, but those are some of the reasons that I've heard people talk about. The Christian nationalists, and I think it's the Seven Mountains. There's a couple of different beliefs that are actively working to bring about the end of the world, restore Israel, and other things like that. So, and also, they read Revelation and are told that they don't know when God's coming back. So you got to be ready. So if you keep that in your mind all the time, that God's coming back tomorrow, well, that helps you get ready, I guess. I don't know.
It's an attractive.
I get that. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to say, so the book of Revelation, and I too, when I was a kid and as a Christian, I have a number of books here actually that are like verse by verse deconstructions of Revelation and the various end times things. It's a great market. And there have been countless predictions. Like I went to a Rapture RAM regional atheist meeting, a Rapture party, basically, in California, because Harold Camping had predicted the date of the apocalypse, or the rapture, not the apocalypse, and so we went there and we had a party. And funny enough, in the middle of the party, there was an earthquake, and people were like, "Ooh, is this it?" And of course, it's just, you're in California. Of course, there's a freaking earthquake. But it is when people look at the world, and anytime we don't know something, anytime there's something we don't have an answer for, and it's something that's scary, like what happens after I die? Why am I alone? Any of those things. How does this work? If we don't have another answer, saying there's a God with a plan is really convenient. And for people who are, sorry, I don't have any other way to say it, for people who are lazy thinkers, it provides an explanation. It doesn't really provide an explanation. It doesn't tell you anything about the how or the why. It doesn't tell you why. Whether it doesn't even tell you that there is a God doing it. It is like our first caller today, who was depressed and then decided God takes away depression so he doesn't have to feel as sad. It's the same thing when you look at the world. Now, religions, and Christianity in particular, have been making predictions about what's going to happen. And people have been profiting off this for ages. Oh, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. But when in the history of humanity have there not been wars or rumors of wars?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to get my friend to see too. And then I also, this was a hang up happened. I said, well, in the Bible it says Jesus died for our sins. I'm like, well, if he died for our sins, why are we still going to hell anyway? And that's when I got hung up on, because I don't understand that either.
Well,
he died on the cross for our sins, but we still going to hell, even though he gave us free will, but we still going to hell.
I can put my hat on and be the preacher that I was going to be. And to be fair, I'll explain this. The basic doctrine is that while Jesus died for your sins, this is a gift that you have to accept, and God will bestow upon you by his grace a faith that will allow you to accept this. And so when Jesus died to serve as a payment for everybody's sin, you have to submit your claim ticket for that payment. You don't just get it automatically. And now let me take my hat off, because I agree with you. It is patently absurd to say that Jesus died for our sins, but you have to go file the claim ticket. Either God loved me enough to die for my sins without a claim ticket, or he didn't. And meanwhile, the whole notion of sin is one of the most disgusting things I can imagine. The notion of dying for sin, of a blood sacrifice, is vile. I don't want anybody to die for me. I never asked for anybody to die for me. And by the way, if the stories are true, Jesus didn't really die or sacrifice anything. He had a bad day, gave up part of a weekend, and then got to keep being God. Hell, I'll take that deal.
Exactly.
And how messed up is it that God, who knows what's going to happen, ends up creating a world where he knows he's going to have to sacrifice his only son to save a bunch of his creations from rules that he created? That just sounds really kind of Rube Goldbergian, to kill his son. I don't know.
Yeah, it's strange.
And you know what's funny too? I had these thoughts as a child, and I voiced them in Sunday school, and I used to get kicked out of Sunday school.
Yeah,
because it just didn't make sense to me. I used to get in trouble for it, because you're never supposed to question God, and I'm like, why? You told me to follow you.
Oh my God, Thea, I absolutely adore you. It's like, you're not supposed to question God. Why not? And that's the exact same question I've had. The difference is that when I was a kid, I wasn't precocious enough. I never got kicked out of Sunday school. When I would ask a question like, why can't we question God? Somebody, a parent or a preacher, would give me an answer that seemed somewhat reasonable at the time, or at least was an answer that I wasn't brave enough to keep challenging. And a lot of times it wasn't even an answer. It was like, well, God knows better than us. He's God. He knows everything. And so while you may be sitting here confused, God is not confused, and God has a plan for your life. Man, this is so disgusting for me to keep putting on my Jesus hat. But when they give answers like that, especially to kids, it's like, well, yeah, who am I to question God? But the real thing is even if there is a God and he knows everything, or way more than I ever will, to say, who is Matt to question God, is an incredibly awful thing to say. Because if he was God, he would know exactly what I'm confused about. He would be able to explain exactly what I need explained to me in the way I need it explained. And he could not possibly be offended that someone less intelligent and less knowledgeable than him asked him for the information that he possesses. If somebody came to me, like I have knowledge about a number of different things, magic stuff, let's say. If somebody came to me and said, hey, do you know how this magic trick works? I'm really wanting to add it to my show. Would you be willing to explain it to me and talk to me, because I'm not getting it? What kind of person would I be to say, no, and because you don't know how it works, now I'm going to kick your ass?
Right.
That's just silly.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Thea. I'm with you. The reaching for the apocalypse and stuff it's not going to end. You're going to have new ones anytime they can point to something that fits. But I got a couple other calls to get to before the time's up. I genuinely thank you so much, Thea. You were refreshing as all get out.
Thank you. Y'all take care.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Oh man. Hey, you want to see if I can, let's see if I can have a conversation with an atheist. Carlos in Puerto Rico, thank you so much for waiting. You want to tell us what your proof is for the non-existence of God. And I'm going to put my hat on and try to pretend like this is the Theist Experience and we have an atheist calling to disprove God, although Jim can do it too.
How you doing? Oh, I was gonna ask how y'all doing, but I know y'all exhausted, so thanks for accepting the call. I think I wasn't clear when I was explaining what I actually wanted to talk about.
Should I take my hat off?
Let me just. I think you should. Yeah.
Okay, that's good because I don't like wearing it.
Okay. So,
here, I'll put this hat on.
Right, so. Excuse me.
Hope we're zoomed in enough where people can read it and they don't think it's an actual MAGA hat. I probably should have made sure that that's legible, but it says "Made you look Black Lives Matter." All right, that's enough, Carlos. I apologize for taking up your time. Let's get to your topic.
Nah, yeah, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you so much for taking me. So let me just introduce myself. I am a agnostic atheist. Just this year, I turned atheist thanks to you and so many of the other hosts in the Atheist Experience and other channels like Cosmic Skeptic, Genetically Modified Skeptic, etc. But recently, I was having a conversation with one of my friends, a very close friend of mine, and they also identify as an atheist, but they're actually to my surprise, they identify as a Gnostic atheist. Sorry, and so I just asked them, okay, so why do you call yourself an agnostic atheist? And they told me because they can actually prove the non-existence of God. And I was like, okay, well, what's your proof? What do you have then? And so the example that they brought, which I'm going to say real quick right now, I heard it, I analyzed it, and I was like, okay, I can see your point. I can see what you're trying to say, but I don't think it necessarily disproves or better yet, proves the non-existence of a God. So, and I just wanted to know your take on it. So what they were trying to say is when you're in a river or in a lake or something, and you're drowning, and your body just sinks to the bottom, and then you drown, and then your body floats back up. They were saying that there was no divine intervention there. There was nothing that happened there that they came to save you. So and essentially what they were trying to say is therefore, there is no God. And I'm like, okay, I can see what you're trying to say in the sense that
that's silly.
I feel like that. What? I'm sorry.
I'm happy to let Jim jump in on this too. But
Yeah,
what I said was that's silly.
Yeah. So one, they're making a claim that there was no divine intervention there. They would need to prove that claim. So they still haven't proven that there is no God. And that would not really be a good way to prove that anyway. So the more specific, if you're going to try and prove something doesn't exist, really the only way you can do it is to go, if this existed or this happened, then we would expect to see the following. And if you don't see the following, then it seems unlikely for the event to happen. This is kind of what we do for the flood, right? If the flood happened, what would we expect to see? We would expect to see that the earth had melted. We would expect to see where the water was stored, right? Because that water had to come from somewhere and go somewhere. It can't just magically appear and disappear. We would expect to see all of this evidence. We don't see all of this evidence. Therefore, it's unlikely for the flood to have happened. And so you're going to do the same thing with a God. So if someone just says there is a God, gives you no characteristics of that God, it becomes very difficult to disprove that God because it's like trying to nail Jello to a wall. But if you're trying to prove a specific Christian God, for instance, the one that answers prayers, well, now we can start looking at, do prayers get answered with what frequency and things like that. We come up to the conclusion that prayers don't get answered at any more frequently than random chance. So those are the ways that you'd go about disproving a particular God. But just the general notion of, yeah, there is a God with no characteristics. I don't know how you'd go about disproving that God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does actually. And that's precisely why I was, having a hard time trying to understand why this particular example would be one to prove the non-existence of God. Right after they brought up the example, I heard them out and I was like, okay, I can kind of get what you're trying to say, but here's why I identify as an agnostic atheist. And it's because the same way that I cannot prove the existence of a God or gods, I cannot prove the non-existence of God or of a God or gods.
Yeah, the short version is that for most gods that have been proposed, they're unfalsifiable, which means you couldn't possibly demonstrate they're wrong. In this case, the argument they presented is neither valid in structure nor sound in the premises. How did they determine? If you think about it, okay, you're in a river, you drown, your body sinks, your body floats. Well, that is just a description of physics. So you might as well say, when I let go of a pin, it falls down. And then say there's no divine intervention there, because it's functionally identical, this physical action. So A, you can't prove there's no divine intervention just because you didn't see it or detect it or anything else. But B, even if there was no divine intervention there, that doesn't mean there's not divine intervention somewhere else. It's like you got 50,000 rocks out in this field, and somebody says there's a bug underneath one of those rocks, and you lifted up one rock and didn't see a bug and concluded that the whole thing's a lie. There's nothing about that argument that is sensible, sound, valid, nothing. It's as silly as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. It's interesting that example that you brought up. I can kind of then try to understand, like, in the sense that, yeah, it's definitely physics as you just mentioned. I guess that, and here I'm just guessing because I'm not them. You know, I'm trying to. I actually encouraged them to call the show, but they told me they were too shy to call. So I was like, okay, well, I'll hopefully. So I hope I'm doing them justice. But I guess that what they were trying to say is, in that example, is though it's physics, it's often believed that a omnibenevolent God, for example, can, it's all loving and everything, and omnipotent, so they can do anything. That it would be expected for that said God to divine.
No. If they're going down that route, you can't say what you would expect a God to do in that circumstance, because you're not God. Maybe God is intentionally letting that person drown because it's their time to die and go on to be in paradise forever, and so they're actually getting something good, and God is doing the best thing for them. How does your friend respond to that? There's nothing about this that's going to get to disproving a God.
Yeah,
and that's because as soon as you have a magical being that can do whatever it wants, that is smarter than you, that doesn't have to follow your reasoning at all, well, that's an unfalsifiable God.
Actually, I hadn't thought of it that way. So thanks, Matt. Thanks for that.
I got one more call to get to. Thank you so much, Carlos. I got to drop you though, because we're past time, and I got another call I got to get to. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling. Last call of the day, Paul in Virginia. Thank you so much for your patience. You wanted to ask something about irrevocable salvation.
Yeah, I'll put this in first so that I don't get the CS mad at you guys because of what I say, and that is that, because you'll probably get complaints anyway, but this statement is related to the people who created Christianity, not the people like, say, you and me that were reasonable believers until we discovered we had been deceived, okay? So anyway, the thing is that I have an idea, maybe hypothesis isn't the right word, but I'll give it this way. Christianity was created for three reasons. One, so that they could feel superior over the other tribes that they stole their lands, enslaved their men, and raped their women. Second, it was so that they could escape. Oh, sorry.
So you seem to have a foundational premise that you can't prove, and that is Christianity was an intentionally created thing. Like some people sat down and said, let's make up a religion for this, rather than an organic process that resulted. So when you say things like they intentionally made this so that they could capture land and rape women, you are asserting not only an action that you cannot prove, but motivations that you could never prove. So why are we talking about it?
I see. Okay, well, the thing is that was my thought. The other thought was that I didn't mean it as in they intentionally did it. That's what it ended up being. But the other thing was that the other thought I had was that the primary reason for having Christianity was so that people could escape responsibility for their actions.
No. How did you rule out? How did you rule out that the primary? Would you listen? How did you rule out that the primary reason was that people believed it was true?
Oh, I didn't think of it that way. I just thought it was, people.
No, what you engaged in some conspiracy thinking, based on what you see happening because of it. You see the consequences of this, and then you infer a reason, and you ignore the notion that some people believe that it's true. How could you overlook the one thing that any Christian on the planet would tell you? I was a Christian for 25 plus years. And if you'd asked me then, why do I believe
Not
it?
that long, but I was too.
So did you not think it was true? Were you part of a conspiracy then when you believed it? How could you possibly overlook?
I thought it was true. I was indoctrinated when I was a child.
If you're indoctrinated, then you think it's true.
Oh, okay, then you're right. Well, the thing was, I want to get it. The reason I thought this was because if I understand, like, let me check the one, Romans 11:29, the gifts of God are irrevocable. My thought was that the idea is that once you become a Christian, you can't ever lose salvation. So as a result, you can do anything you want. And that was one of the things that's been said. If you wanted to sin, you don't become an atheist. You become a Christian.
Well, you become a Catholic so you can get forgiven.
Sure.
Catholic,
So
yeah.
That is a much better discussion than everything else that you said before. The problem is that there are Christians who believe that you can't lose salvation. I have pastors who I'm friends with who think they will see me in heaven because despite the fact that I don't believe in any of it, they're convinced I was actually saved. There are other people who don't think it was actually saved. There are other people who think that you can in fact lose it. And the truth is nobody knows, but yes, you're right. The thing is your statement that if you want to sin, you don't become an atheist, you become a Christian, or as Jim pointed out, a Catholic where you can get penance. That's probably true, but the consequences may well be the same. And the truth is we don't have any way to know what the actual doctrine is because God hasn't showed up to clear it up. So all we have is what the Baptists say, what the Pentecostals say, what the Episcopalians say, what the Catholics say, what the Hindus say, what the Jews say, what the Muslims say, and none of it gets us anywhere, which is why I'm very fond of the verse in the Bible that says, let God be true and every man a liar. And the second that God shows up to tell me truly what the book means, that's when I will say, here's what the book means.
Oh, great. I got something for you. You can have a line because I know sometimes you want to say things where somebody says something stupid. So I have a way that you can politely insult somebody if you want to use it. You say, I dismiss this claim as completely bogus and without merit, which in plain old Galveston English means what you just said is pure bullshit.
Yeah.
I'd rather say this thing's plain old bullshit.
Me too.
Okay,
let your yes be let your yes be yes and let your no be no.
Rude.
I can be rude.
You can't be rude.
I can be rude whenever the fuck I want.
Pretty much.
Absolutely fucking right.
That's right. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
That'll do it.
Yeah, that will.
I tell you what. Well, what a show.
Yeah.
We had attempts of people to call in and present arguments who decided to talk about wagon wheels and things that aren't true but couldn't have proved the point if they would have. People who wanted to cite what the Bible says. Theists who had objections to apocalyptic claims. We had atheists with some bad arguments, some of them their own, some of them on behalf of other people. Yeah. Is the weather still nice down there?
Yeah, weather is still awesome. Looking forward to
I can't wait
tomorrow.
Until I get to come down and visit.
Looking
forward to it. First of all, I want to thank the crew once again, if they can pop themselves up there. There's a lot that goes on here behind the scenes that nobody will ever know about, but none of you would be able to hear anything, see anything, like anything, subscribe to anything, which, by the way, if you haven't liked and subscribed, I don't know what else we could do. You wouldn't be able to listen to these conversations if it weren't for those people there, because they can do that show, whether I show up or not, whether Jim shows up or not, as long as there's somebody here willing to, engage.
Right.
The show goes on. We will see you all next week. Please take care of yourself. Be safe. We are not through with the pandemic, and there are loads of other problems in reality. Let's try and focus on the reality that we seem to share, that we're convinced we have, and work on ways to make it better together rather than throwing up our hands and saying, gosh, let's hope God's got a plan, because somebody's got to do God's work while God's busy not existing. See you next time.
What will it take for you to start opening your eyes, to start questioning the
It's time to get sexy, so watch Secular Sexuality Live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTSS and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callsex.